Gangsters podcast. Tonight is a very special and powerful night as we celebrate the Earth Strong of the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey. I have two very special guests with me tonight. They are both new to the Truth Gangsters, and I'm honored to have them both. Omar Ryan, better known as Melanin, poet, advocate, legal. So many accolades for this brother, but he is here with us tonight to share his thoughts on the subject. And of course, we have Priest Alex, Mael Priest, who is a herbal consultant. He is a social advocate for African spirituality. He's very knowledgeable on the retentions of African spirituality and Mayaism in Jamaica and other places, including folk religion, etc. So I welcome them both to the panel. Thank you both brothers for joining, and thanks for the guests in the chat who may or may not join us in the conversation. We'll see. Marcus Messiah Garvey, born on August 17th, 1887, transitioned on June 10th, 1940. A Jamaican Pan Africanist, exceptional orator, a scholar, an author, co founder of what is today undisputably the most successful Pan African movement to date, with approximately 6 million members in about 40 countries, that taught Black people race pride, self reliance, and not simply in theory, but actually provided a blueprint on how to get it done. Actually set up organizations, systems, physical and otherwise, to chart the road to freedom. However, like many men and women who not only dreamed of radical change, but actively pursued it, Garvey had many critics, many people who thought that his dream was valid, but his execution was poor. Some of them concluded that he was arrogant. Some of them concluded that he was egotistic, which is no different from men like Secretary Fidel Castro and even our great mother, Winnie Mandela. They've all been criticized similarly. So tonight we want to do a deep dive into the legacy of Garvey and the UNIA and interrogate the question, is Pan-Africanism, as the Garveys imagined it, still relevant today? So Alex, welcome. Thanks for joining. I want to start with you.
Peace and love, sis.
Thank you. Thank you for joining. I wanted to start with the question, just jumping right in. What do you think is the most important legacy of Marcus Garvey and the UNIA movement?
Well, I think that the first most important thing would be pride in self. Pride in self, I believe, is the most valid contribution that he would have made. Um, you know, from what I understand, the oral history indicates that he, Marcus Garvey, was of Maroon descent, what they call Maroon. The thing about it is that Jamaicans on a whole don't recognize that this word, maroon, and non-maroon were created by the British and helped to put together a caste system that separated the indigenous people of the island. The thing with Marcus Garvey is that I think that he knew something as well about himself, and that would be that he also had roots with the original people of Jamaica. If we are to examine the question, is Pan Africanism still relevant in 2024? I think that the most important takeaway from what Marcus Garvey was doing should be for us that the indigenous peoples, the dark skinned peoples of the earth, ought to unify in order to face an issue that we have been facing, I would say, even for more than 500 years. And that is that one set of people have decided that they will rule us. I think that being that the indigenous peoples of the earth were the first peoples, as indicated by the word indigenous or aboriginal, I think that we would have been the first to make certain mistakes. And the, the people who assail us now, they were once subject to us. We must recognize this. And we must recognize that as much as we glorify our ancestors, we love them, we reverence them, that they were human. And like any other human being, they made mistakes. And they have a statement, a saying that hindsight is 2020 vision. And I believe that we should use that to our advantage now. More information is available to us now. And I think that because of that, we have a greater responsibility now than even they did to get it right. We have greater connectivity than ever before. Look at this platform that we're on right now. And I think that we are not as efficient as them. And so we need to examine ourselves, right? What they say, you should never try to fill a great man's shoes. And so we examine ourselves with them as a yardstick, but we have to make our own mark now. And we have to realize that our ancestry is important to look into. Who we are supposed to be, who many lies were told about us. And so my statement um, in 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 opening, in being honored with the ability to open this, is that we need to look into who we really are, because it is Marcus that said, "A tree without roots must die." Right? So we need to get to the root, and radical change that you mentioned. Radical comes from the Latin radix, which means root. So radical change means we have to change from the roots, because even our roots have been infected by colonization sickness. And so the most important word that I would like to open with is unity. Right? So I will yield.
Thank you, Alex. You know, this idea of darker peoples of the earth uniting, I find it interesting, and I would dare say, if there is one thing that we have to consider with tonight's question about whether Pan Africanism is still relevant, we have to take that into consideration. Certainly, Garvey did not mince words when he identified what race the black man and black woman was a part of. He was very much an Africanist. He didn't, to my knowledge, necessarily see himself as a Jamaican or as an indigenous part of anywhere else on earth except for Africa. Melanin, talk to us about this. Talk to us about this idea of connecting with all darker peoples on the earth, as opposed to what I certainly see as Garvey's very narrow definition of uniting Africans and people of African descent.
Yeah, greetings, Keisha, and someone like my brother Alex Minot, um,
I mean,
and everyone else on the platform. Greetings, good to be here. Yeah, and thanks for the invite to this important discussion because I think the topic is a topic that Pan Africanists, people of a certain kind of consciousness, would have been discussing over time. I think it's important to delve into this, especially in this time where I think globalization and technology have taken over the minds of our youth, and some of it is not necessarily positive. So we really have to interrogate whether Pan Africanism is still relevant. And in my view, it is extremely relevant in this day and age. Marcus Garvey spoke about Africa for the Africans at home or abroad. I think that was one of his the central tenets of Pan Africanism. And I don't think we would have defined Pan Africanism within our context of discussion properly. Um, but I think Pan Africanism at the outset was the global international black movement in the early 20th century that aims to unify um, black African groups and having African solutions to African problems, defining who we are as Africans, and not in respect to the Europeans or anybody else. And race first. I think, in respect to people of dark hue, so to speak, connecting and finding solutions to our problems, I think within the 20th century, if we can put on spectacles and look at the world 100 years ago, the reality at the time of in the US, you had segregation, black people living under certain discriminatory and racist laws in the US. In Jamaica and the Caribbean, we were all subjects to Britain at the time. And same way in other places of the world. Africa was under colonialism. King Leopold from Congo would have just killed out 10 million Congos between 1908, Congolese people between 1908 to 1915. So the experience of black people, African people in particular, at the time, would have warranted African people finding African solutions to African problems because the systems, the infrastructure of the Western world, which includes economic policies, the legal structures, political structures, education system, were all created to keep African people in line, controlled, subjected to the system, a system that our own blood and labor, the entire Western world as it is now, capitalism, is really based on the labor of black people. Eric Williams wrote this book, Capitalism and Slavery, that made the connection. And for us to be at the bottom of the pile, so to speak, and I think, and that is still the situation. Um, my good friend from UA, Dr. Andrea Horton, published a book recently where he looked at the productivity throughout the regions. And for the last 70 years, Africa and the Caribbean, the regions which have the most African black leaders, leading countries, have been the least productive regions economically. That's the reason why people from the Caribbean and Africa uh, tend to always want to migrate to the north, where they think it is better economically. So I think the idea that African people, black people, should unify to find solutions to their problems is still relevant today because most of the systems are still entrenched in a way to disadvantage African people. And that is my contribution to this section.
Thanks, Melanin. Leighton, welcome. Thanks for joining this edition of Truth Gangsters. Pan Africanism, as opposed to fighting for the justice and equality of all darker peoples on the earth, are certainly parallel, but are they the same? And is it not possible, in fact, necessary for us to not only chart our course as Pan Africanists, but to also include the fight of other people, such as the native Jamaicans, the native Australians? What are your thoughts?
Who is the question directed to, Leighton or
Leighton,
myself?
Leighton, Leighton.
Uh,
Okay.
that is a difficult one. That's a difficult one. When, for instance, I see African people in solidarity with the people of Palestine, for instance. On the one hand, you say it's good for African people as a downtrodden people to to show solidarity with other downtrodden people. And yet we see that, and as Garvey mentioned, that African people all over the world are at the bottom of the barrel in every society. And this was the most, when I read the philosophy and opinions of Marcus Garvey, that's the thing that struck me most powerfully when he said, no African anywhere in the world will be free unless Africa is free. And he showed that it needed for China to be powerful, for Chinese to be free, and Indians and all other races, and the same for Africans. To the extent that there is a, a pecking order in global white supremacy that puts the darkest skinned among not just Africans, but the darkest skin Indians, the darkest skin of any race of people at the bottom of the pile, then it's kind of it's necessary for us to advocate for ourselves and to be whole amongst ourselves, I believe, before we can advocate or fragment ourselves or throw our weight behind other races of people. Um, Even if those races are affected by white supremacy, because none of them is as seriously affected or adversely affected as the Africans.
It seems that at the outset of this issue of Pan Africanism being relevant, that the first issue that we face is, as Melanin said, the definition. Because let's be frank, a lot of black people don't even consider themselves to be African. So even that word Pan Africanist is triggering. We have the ADOS movement in the US, for example, that distance themselves from Africans from the continent. We have black Jamaicans who say that they were the first Jamaicans, that they are not born on the soil of Africa. So there's a lot of divisions where people don't even see themselves as Africans to begin with. I think in Garvey's time it was a little bit easier because more people connected themselves to being descendants of Africa. How do we how do we address this, or how do we even begin to discuss this, Alex? What's your view?
Okay, well, in my perspective, as an initiated priest, as a practitioner of Mayal, I think that I tend to approach things from that spiritual perspective because as a priest, I'm also bound to study history, study our traditions, that sort of thing very closely. Where Mayal is concerned, Mayal considers and has always considered itself, not as how anthropologists have considered it, but has considered itself as the intersection of the indigenous to the archipelago of Jamaica, as well as the indigenous traditions of Africa. So we see Jamaican people, dark skinned Jamaican people, who can trace their lineage back past a certain point, right? As in the you and I, us, as being a mixture of African and indigenous bloodline. Of course, with some European intervention, which wasn't always negative, because, like the Irish, for example, many of them were made to work in very similar conditions, and they ended up intermixing with the dark-skinned indigenous people of Jamaica. But the way I see it is that our fate has been intertwined from the beginning of this whole colonial enterprise of the European. Our enemy is the supremacist um, European that works off of the manifest destiny principle. This principle is what prevents us from developing. And it is this principle that, my ancestors, who people call today Maroons, were fighting. And as a matter of fact, all of the Maya societies throughout Jamaica, uh, only some of them would have been Maroon. You had right through the island various Maya societies, just as how you have revival churches today. And they considered that European colonization was an evil that had to be exorcised from the land. But my point is that I think that saying that we are indigenous should not mean that we are not African with African roots then, because I do very much claim my African heritage. But I must always remember as a custodian of this holy land, because Jamaica, though called capture land, is not captured by us. It was captured by the European and it does not belong to them. And so, therefore, we have no need of considering Jamaica to be some extension of what the Rastafari worldview, for example, would call Babylon, because this land does not belong to them. What I'm saying is that I don't see any reason why there should be any separation, because even anciently, the ancient, you would say, Americans or ancient Caribbeans or first ancestors traded freely with African navigators, and indigenous navigators from the Americas did go to Africa, did go to the Pacific Islands. And these are people These are our people. And when the Africans came to Jamaica, they were taken in by people with pretty much the same beliefs, in many cases, look just like them, right? And there was intermarriage, and there was, of course, offspring. We are descendants of those offspring. So the only flaw that I see with the Pan Africanist mindset is um, leaving Jamaica, right? Repatriation, right? I don't think that that is necessary unless you are certain that you're completely unmixed, right? But I can tell you, majority of Jamaicans, real Jamaicans, I'm not talking about those who went to PICA and purchased a naturalization certificate. Real Jamaicans of the land, this land belongs to us, and we have our claim in Africa. And that is my perspective. I think that we should pursue both.
Thanks, Alex. I think Garvey addressed this issue brilliantly when he said, no black person anywhere, irrespective of your mixture, irrespective of your history with native people, no black people will ever have any respect or dignity globally unless Africa is free, unless Africa is reinstated to its rightful position. So, notwithstanding all our mixtures, for those of you who are mixed with indigenous blood, etc., for me, Babylon is not just a physical place, it's also a system, it's also a philosophy, it's a way of life. And by that definition, Jamaica is very much Babylon in some sense. And I don't believe Haiti is a great example. I don't believe any fight to reclaim Jamaica, Haiti, or anywhere outside of Africa will do us much good if the very home and birthplace of the black woman and man is not free. Omar, what are your thoughts on that?
I totally support that position, and I advocate for that position in my pronouncements as well. That the picture is a big picture. We cannot necessarily exchange an island for a continent, the oldest continent on the world. You know, Africa as a continent has more than 1 billion people. Um, Africa has the largest youth population in the world of all continents because in Asia, they kind of control birth rate. In Europe, I don't know if it's a coal or industrialization, but people are not really necessarily having kids. The good thing is that the African continent, there is a very youthful population to take the African continent forward for the next 50 years. And I will not exchange Jamaica. And I want to agree with you and Alex to a certain extent that Jamaica is kind of mixed. Jamaica is our place, really, as indigenous peoples, as people who our ancestors worked. No, no work. Our ancestors were enslaved for 300 and years in Jamaica, from around 1517, according to Richard Sheridan, to 1838. Whole heap of years of enslavement. Our labor built capitalism and the world as it is. And that labor was one of the primary places was Jamaica. And when you look at the European system that control the philosophy, the mindset, the leaders that we have, it is indeed an extension of the metropole in England and America. So Jamaica is not controlled by us. Our philosophy is not running Jamaica. It's not a black philosophy. So that until countries in Africa have the economic power, the political influence at places like the UN Security Council, where Africans don't think that they need to travel to Europe or America to get a better life. That until we reach that position, Africans will not be respected globally and treated with how we want to be treated, so to speak, with the civil, political, and economic rights that we want. Right now, them have to respect the Chinese, because the Chinese has risen to such economic power and heights in the world. From the poverty, 50 years ago, China was a poverty-stricken place. Since the 70s come up, Chinese have virtually changed the script. And so the world now looks at China different. India, India is coming along, but I think majority of Indians are still living in some despicable conditions in India, and socially they still need to improve. However, those people are getting more respect in the world because of improvements on their homeland. And I just want to touch on the point on people who think that their nationality or some, what I would say, some smaller kind of definition, their ethnic group, whatever. I think the broader group, what Marcus Garvey and others were, and we still try to have to explain to some people, is that our racial identity, that broad identity, because when we travel or go anywhere, sometimes I'm a European or a Japanese, wherever them come from, probably just look for you and assume that you're from Africa. They have to probably listen to your name or something. Them hear my name Omar and them say, oh, I'm not have an African name, I probably come from the Caribbean or America. So at the end of the day, our racial identity, and that's the reason why I think even in America, they would have say African Americans, because they want people to remember that they're Africans before they're Americans. In Jamaica, we're Africans before we're Jamaicans. I'm an African before me is a Rastaman, before anything else. I was born that way, you know? So we, and Peter Tosh tell people as well, no matter where you come from, as long as you're African, yeah, as long as you're black, you're an African. It doesn't matter where. So we cannot hide from the truth. And I think some of us want to hide from reality. And I think that is what is the thing, because I think some people still perceive Africa as this poor, impoverished continent, not being totally aware of all the facts and all the wealth, that comes out of Africa or come out of Africa, so to speak. So I think whenever we are taught the truth through our education system, would realize that it's no escaping it. We're all Africans.
Indeed. Thanks for that, Melanin. Leighton, what are your thoughts on this issue?
I think that we need to be honest with ourselves. Firstly, I love that you mentioned Haiti. Haiti is exhibit A of why Pan Africanism is necessary. It's the only successful armed revolution in the African diaspora, I believe. And notwithstanding their beating back the French, beating out the French, and establishing their own nation, they have been relegated to perpetual poverty, perpetual strife, simply by global white supremacist interference and really ganging up on them. From the beginning, they never had a chance. Once they beat France, the whole structure of global white supremacy come down upon them. And until they have a bulwark against that, which would be a united Africa, then it's like if you if we wanted to, if we were decided in Jamaica to treat Chinese nationals or Chinese descendants in a prejudicial way or in an oppressive way, we would have to deal with China. Anybody can deal with Africans anyway, because them not have to deal with Africa. And so until Africa is free, as was noted before, none of us in the diaspora will be free. As to the other part of it, let me tell you where Pan-Africanism really suffers. Let's look at Jamaica as an example. At one time, I posted on my Facebook page, suppose we started an African Jamaican party, political party, where membership was based on your identification as an African Jamaican. Because it's one man, one vote. If we are 70 odd percent of the population, it would guarantee us political supremacy. And then we could carry out a program. Man, I was never shut down so fast. Out of many one people, Jamaica is a melting pot, blah, 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 blah. And if you look at if you just look at Jamaica and what our flight from our Africanness, when you read about how them would have stone, the picnic them would have stone Garvey in the streets and mock him. When I listen to the Jamaicans talk about being glad that they were exposed to the redemptive power of Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior, and how that would not have been possible had they been left in heathen Africa. So what we are is in a situation where we do not, we want to escape our Africanness. That's the truth. So nobody's really, only a few remnants, true believers, hardcore, diehards, are really looking towards Africa for anything. You know, anything exceptional that come out of Africa, African boy find a way to make light without electricity. We just say, wow, tell you, Africans, really, really, we are a different kind of people. But that's just a fairy tale, a one-off. In our mind, we don't think of any industry that could take over the world with a regeneration. We don't think in terms of that at all, at all, at all. We think that our destiny is inexplicably, I mean, I'm sorry, the word is escaping me, but intricately wound up and tied up with white destiny and white determination. And the last thing I'd want to say is that you can fight your condition in one of two ways. You can change it or change the circumstances that create it, or you can accommodate yourself to it and try to live comfortably with it. And so many Africans, both on the continent and in the diaspora, have decided to assimilate and make themselves comfortable with the system of white supremacy. you know, and we we identify with that, you know. We laud those people, Obama and the rest of them who have demonstrated black excellence in the service of global white supremacy and have that serve as a source of quote unquote African pride.
Priest Alex, I know you can't stay with us much longer, but I'm interested in Garvey's one love, one God, one aim, one destiny, and this idea of unity being a central tenet of Pan Africanism and Garveyism. Coming from a continent with the most ethnic groups, the most varied spiritual practices, the most varied languages, if unity in this sense is a requirement of Pan Africanism, does it not automatically fail when it comes to our particular history? Can you just share your thoughts on that?
Okay. So in the context of the spiritual aspect of Garvey's movement, my understanding is that he had a particularly Christian leaning. You know, that is my understanding. Please correct me if I'm wrong. But the thing is that tradition of our people, whether African or in our case here, indigenous, Lokono, Arawak, tradition is what makes a people a people. The the Let's put it in context. Here in Jamaica, we have an issue, and the reigning issue is the so-called reigning monarch of Jamaica, which is currently stated as Charles III of the House of Windsor. But people neglect one particular title that Charles holds, and that is the Defender of the Faith. It means that wherever the British are, he is in charge of even their spiritual, their spirituality. He is the defender of the faith of Anglicanism and the actual head of the Anglican Church. Jamaica, upon its military occupation, which we're currently still under, right? And this needs to be made plain. Jamaica is under military occupation. Jamaica was divided into parishes. A parish, according to the Black's Law Dictionary, is a circuit of ground that is under the control of a church or a vicar. This, from the very get go, has been a holy war, a spiritual war. Because even the early Mayalists, my ancestors, they recognized this and considered colonization by the British to be a manifestation of evil. Because, of course, you judge a tree by its fruits. And the work that the British were doing here was not a work of good. And so I can get behind one God in as far as there is a creator of all things, which is something that all indigenous uh, traditions, indigenous spiritual traditions, do indeed believe. However, the matter of this is that we have an ancient tradition that ties us to those indigenous roots, whether it is indigenous Jamaican or indigenous African. Okay, we have a belief system, we have a tradition that is the same tradition that that pushed forward Chief Taki, that pushed forward Sam Sharp, that pushed forward even Paul Bogle, that pushed forward Nani. Grande Nani was the high priestess of Jamaica in totality, which is why so many revival churches, if you sit down and speak to them, they have great reverence for Nani as a prophet, as an apical ancestress. We have a tradition, and we must recognize something. The Society for the Propagation of the Gospel, and I'm sure that my esteemed colleague Omar, that works in a reparation center, should know and be able to back me up. It was the Society for the Propagation of the Gospel, an Anglican organization that propagated slavery and the plantation system in Jamaica. They funded it. As a matter of fact, that same Society for the Propagation of the Gospel, they are the organization that sponsored the wars against Nani and her people, the so-called Maroons. Okay? They are the ones that funded the soldiers, whether it was enslaved soldiers, the Black Shots, or the Red Coat British. They spent the money. And what does that tell you? That tells you that they approach everything from a spiritual point of view. The only way that we can totally separate ourselves from them is to sever even mental and spiritual ties. And this was the work of the Mayal societies. So, my perspective as a Mayal priest is that we already have the philosophy and the spirituality necessary to liberate ourselves mentally from those chains that even Bob Marley spoke about. We have that formula. The greatest trick, because what people don't know is that the what people don't know is that evangelism did not start. Christian evangelism did not start until the 1840s, because it was believed that if the slave became a Christian, then he would be entitled to the rights of man. Okay? So Christianity, I don't know about anywhere else, but Christianity has never been an adequate option for our people. Our people have always found solace in their traditions. And so the point I'm making and where I'm culminating to, because as Sister Keisha has mentioned, I can't stay the entirety of the program. But the point is that the 1760 act that is now called today the Obia Act, right? The act for the prevention of irregular assembly of slaves. Okay, you hear the name of this act? This was a tangible law that we can put our finger to, that states that there was a legal push by the plantocracy to make our unity illegal. And the main focal point of destroying our unity was the destruction of our spirituality, because that unified us, that brought us together. So, I would hope that even you, Sister Keisha, as a legal mind, would understand that in order for us to make the contribution that we would need to make Africa to rise from the position that it is in, we have to have a liberated mentality. And so, therefore, we should lead the pack here in Jamaica, because it was Jamaica that perfected the Obia laws that were put right throughout the Caribbean. Because Obi or Mayal or original traditions, they preached freedom, and they taught our people to stand up against oppression. And so we should be doing things like moving to have constitutional cases against these things that prevent us from practicing our indigeneity. The first being the 1760 Obia Act, because it was a priest that blessed Taki and put him forward, him and another named Jamaica. They called him Jamaica, right? Blessed the two of them in Saint Mary and sent them forth. Just the same way that the Archbishop of Canterbury crowns the King or Queen of England, we need to have our tradition to bring us forward, right? And
But
end.
but Alex, I hate to cut you, but I want you to answer this before you leave. It's one thing to say that we need our traditions, but is it not true that amongst a people as diverse as we are, traditions not only vary, but they sometimes run counter to each other? Even in the chat, Tifara is reminding us that even within Rasta, you have Bible Rasta, you have Rasta who might look to Ethiopian Orthodox Christianity. um you have people who don't deal with blood, and yet you have tribes or ethnic groups rather, that a lot of their initiations and practices require sacrifices like cutting goats the head, cutting the head of a chicken. Some of them
Yes.
are diametrically opposed to each other. So when we speak of unity in the sense that Garvey mentioned and Pan-Africanism, and then we say we have to stick to our traditions, why should our traditions matter or should be placed as a central focus when we think about our freedom? Is our blackness, is our Africanness not enough?
No, well, you never ever unify with people based on your differences. You unify with people based on your similarities. That is why it's unification. And so my spirituality does not necessarily preclude me, and it doesn't at all preclude me from unifying with anybody else, because I must be plain. I am the first to tell any Rasta, for example, that their traditions that they practice are by and large indigenous culture. Okay. And I can safely say that Rasta emerged from the same Mayal societies. But what happened to Mayal was that because of oppression, many had to mix it with Christianity, which is why you have what you know called revival. And it is from that that Rastafari emerged. So my thing is that you don't have to believe what I believe on that level in order to, you and I don't have to have the same spiritual practices, but we believe, all indigenous traditions believe that there is one creator, and we all believe in freedom,
So
right?
Alex, before we go on to the war, and one priest said we have to bless the meeting with the blood of a chicken, and a Rasta man said we burn blood, so we are left this place here. We now link up for storm the castle, for storm Prince King Charles. Where does that leave us?
Where does that leave us? This is the real reason why, of course, you have people having their temples, etc. and thing. So if a Rasta has their rituals that they do, them not do them ritual, right? And the Mayalists do their ritual. But there is no necessity for that to be division, right? For example, in Suriname they have the motto unity in diversity. So just the same way, of course, you have people, many different people living in one place. They have their space to practice their traditions, but when it's time to get down to business as a nation, you put personal differences aside. And this is something that our people cannot understand. It doesn't matter what anybody says, I'm never going to leave my tradition. So if that means that because of one other person's closed minded view, right, that we can't work together, then so be it. But I'm pretty certain that if we all have a unified goal, right, where our people are going to live in happiness and prosperity, we don't need, we don't need to be disunified over that, right? So my message is that for people who are Pan-Africanists, I would advise you to look into everything that has happened in our condition here in Jamaica, because that same Obia Act, and as a legal mind, Sister Keisha, I think that I will try my best to send you some of these acts so that you can look at them. What they were doing was banning drumming and dancing and certain celebrations that we know are both oriented towards African people and indigenous people of the Americas. So they were not saying that believing anything in particular was illegal. What they were saying was illegal was the way that we worship, the way that we fellowship, the way that we come together. So all indigenous people do drumming, all indigenous people do dancing, and all indigenous peoples have feasts for the glorification of the Most High and the spirits of the land, right? And the ancestors. So let us unify in our similarities. That's my message for today.
I agree with you 100%, Alex. And definitely we the Obia Acts and all the legislation that has been designed specifically to oppress African spirituality, that deserves its own discussion. So I hope you'll be able to join for that one as well. But thank you for
Anytime you're
taking
doing it,
time
just
out.
let me know, sis.
Yeah, man, can't do it without you, man. That is a must. So thanks again, Alex. Leighton, I see that you have unmuted your mic. Did you want to respond?
Yes, indeed. To me, the issue is simple. White people have all kind of problems among themselves. Um, Italians and Irish might not get along, and none of them might get along with Russians, and so on and so forth. Um, they might diss the Greeks and the Poles and you name it. All kind of internecine warfare among these white people. But on one thing, they are unified, if nothing else. That black people must be beneath all of them. And until African people get the same idea. Yeah, a lot of our various peoples don't take tea. A lot of us are natural enemies. We've been fighting over this and that. Our customs and whatever are different. We might not eat the same foods. All kind of differences. But until we are unified on one thing, that nobody must control the wealth of Africa. or benefit from it except Africans. If we would just unify on that one thing, then the whole world would change.
Thank you for that, Leighton. Um, Going back to Garvey and Garveyism, one of the things that struck me about Garvey's journey around the African diaspora is that he was very disturbed by what he saw as the disparity of wealth. For example, in places like America, you know, you had the elite and affluent blacks in places like Harlem, and compared to other parts of America where the Jim Crow law was heavily practiced and people were literally starving. And this really disturbed him. It seems that one of the differences with our modern day leaders and modern day people who even claim Pan Africanism is that they don't seem to be that disturbed. So when you hear Umar Johnson on Breakfast Club bigging up Jay-Z, bigging up Nas, there seems to be some confusion as to what unity is really going to take and what Pan Africanism really means. Sorry, Leighton, you wanted to add something?
Yes, I want to say in relation to that um we have to understand what things are consistent with Pan Africanism and what things are not. Capitalism is, in my view, and I think this needs to be clarified, is completely anti Pan African. And to the extent that people who clothe themselves in Pan Africanist garb are capitalist operators, sympathizers, apologists. We need to burn them out.
Melanin, was Garvey a capitalist? Some people accuse him of being such.
Um, all right. Garvey was the first major social entrepreneur for black people. I could just put that out there. Because long before organized capitalism, which is based on the labor of our ancestors, African people were doing trade and commerce. We all know about the Trans-Sahara trade. Africa was the wealth. Look, it was really the wealth of Africa that really spurred the Iberians, the Spanish and the Portuguese to leave the Iberian Peninsula and venture into Africa. Um, in about 1323 thereabout, when Mansa Musa made his trip to Mecca and he gave all kind of gifts to the various cities that he passed through, straight to Egypt, etc. That caused a lot of myths and stories to be created that spread like wildfire straight to Europe. And just as how our African and Caribbean, Jamaican brothers and sisters are so into going to America because they think that that is the life. Europeans who were just coming out of the Black Plague or whatever it is, the place for them to come was Africa. So I'm saying this to say that Africans have been capitalists themselves, not in the sense that how we understand it. And I am not adverse to capitalism, nor because my view is that it's a mixture of communism slash socialism and capitalism that is going to get us out of this economic thing that we are in. Because the truth is, If we be honest to ourselves, it comes down to economics, people. If the economics not right, that we're not gonna get no respect. We're not gonna be able to feed with kids. We're not gonna be able to buy the soap them from Tifara. We're not gonna get to eat the food them from Kushites. And Kushites not gonna be able to do the things them what them need to do. So we need money. And we have to get this thing serious. Somehow we get too caught up in this spirituality and this praising this and them thing that we need to make money, people. And it comes down to us organizing ourselves. That is what Europeans and Americans have done, organize themselves around our labor, and our resources from the continent to create this world of iPhone and Facebook and all kind of something and all kind of companies that are using resources from our continent and our labor. So that until we get it right ourselves and organize ourselves around our resources, our labor, and make it work for us, that is what it comes down to. That is what it comes down to for me. It's not necessarily so, boy, of course, capitalism. Everybody knows the capitalism bad. Same so is communism. You have only a local set of people who control everybody and tell them what to do. I don't believe in none of them thing at the extreme. To me, it's more a hybrid form, but we as Africans have to decide what that means for us. Just as how the former president of it's not Uganda, Tanzania, who came here in the 70s, he had his own definition of African socialism, Ujama. Um, Forgot his name now. I read it as if it's autobiography one at a time. But um, Julius Nyerere, yes, he had his own definition of socialism, and I think that is what we should do: define capitalism for ourselves, define socialism, and create a system. And I think that is what Africans have failed to do at a government level. You know, at a government level.
Because as the war correspondent Del Jones said once, we can't fight a technological, scientific, economical war with flyers. Leighton, question for you. Is Leighton saying that Pan Africanism is incongruent with and can't include free market, capitalism, privatization? Question from Linus.
Africans are a communal people. Capitalism um, is an atomistic philosophy. Like capitalist economy begins with the tenets that all actors in the economy are selfish and greedy. Like that's not something that communists are saying. This is what any capitalist textbook tells you. This is the basic. This is the basis of uh, classical economics. So if you're being nice, if you're being fundamental about it, any culture that um, that believes in Ubuntuism, um, African communalism, African cooperation, can embrace, cannot flourish in a capitalist system without divorcing itself from its Africanness. Where people in the West get caught up is in thinking that if you are anti-capitalist, you are doomed to you're anti-commerce, you're anti-wealth, and nothing could be further from the truth. Privatization, privatization, and the concentration of wealth in fewer and fewer hands, which is not just a hallmark of capitalism, but its inevitable consequence
But
does not.
how can we have individual wealth without capitalism?
How can we have individual wealth without
Yeah.
capitalism? Um, well, if capitalism is a construct of, is something that developed in the 18th, 19th centuries, how did we have individual wealth before? You see, here's the thing. We take certain things that are of recent vintage and we imagine that it can't be any other way. Even in the centers of capitalism, there is communal commercial success. The one of the most successful football clubs in Europe, one of the most storied clubs in Europe, Bayern Munich, perennial German champions, is not privately owned. It's like, and I don't, it's not like one of these things where, 50 odd percent of it is owned by a few big corporations and, that sprinkling of the minor shares. No, like Bayern Munich is like 85% owned by the people of Munich. Obviously, them hire professional managers to run the club is wildly successful, but there are certain things that Bayern Munich absolutely cannot do that other clubs can, because Bayern Munich cannot go to the people and say, this is what it is doing. So the idea that, and there are myriad examples if people choose to look, of worker-owned companies, like like not privately owned companies that are wildly successful and give great returns to its owners, who are actually the people. So the idea that you have to have a top man where own everything and hire some manager and pay big money to oversee some people we get paid minimum wage or below, if you can get some illegals to do it, and just churn and churn and churn wealth and what have you, as the model for growth and economic achievement. And nah, it was so funny hearing one of the speakers before talk about development, an index of development being impliedly being the welfare of the mass of the people. When some statistics tell you, say, the vast majority of Americans is one paycheck away from homelessness. One paycheck away from homelessness. And in our mind, America is rich and developed. What is rich? You can spend $1 trillion on a F1 bomber. You know how long them people that have the F1 bomber in a development? 25 years, That is them horizon. We don't even have a 25-year education plan. Them have 25-year in a development. One F1 bomber, which after it fly a couple time, it have out of commission because this and that and the other. I mean, we have to be we have to be serious and
It
look
seems to
into
me. I'm so sorry to cut you. Go ahead, Leighton.
the things that we expose and the things that we believe. When we say we have to redefine capitalism, we don't have to redefine capitalism. Capitalism is defined. Capitalism is what it is. We need to define something else. Garvey. When I see people rubbish Garvey because Garvey was a capitalist. If you are in a capitalist, when you're in Rome, you have to do as the Romans do, not to be part of Rome, but not to be vanquished by Rome. But as I say, even in that capitalist system, you don't have to. Well, look here. You see, every time I hear black capitalists, my teeth great. What these people want to do is enslave their people like other white people did enslave them people. And then when them get really, 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 really rich off them people, exploiting them people, just like Vibes, Diddy, and the rest of them go and rub shoulders with white people and we look on them and say, yeah, yeah, real big man, you know, oh, white man have to rate him, you know. A mindset.
It
That's it.
seems to me that one of the things that separates Garvey from modern day Garvey and the UNIA from modern day pro black activists and quote unquote Pan Africanists is that Garvey had a very practical and pragmatic approach to empowering black people. People often talk about the fact that the UNIA was so wildly successful and had millions of members across the world, and they say, why? There was a tangible benefit. Garvey was selling them a better financial state. It wasn't just, oh, you're going to be a proud African and you're going to feel good about yourself, which is what a lot of the movements promise now, is this theoretical, figurative kind of freedom. Yeah, man, you turn ital and you do couple yoga and you swim in the river, you're going to feel closer to the creator. No. Garvey's movement was based on practical advancement. And I think we we miss an opportunity if we dismiss the people's need, desire for capital gain, capital control, whatever we want to call it. Um, as you said, Leighton, the use of commerce as a tool of freedom, not as a tool of oppression.
Exactly. And this is the reason why I use Bayern Munich as an example. One, it's white people, so black people naturally look at it for an example. I mean, I'm sorry, that's just the way it is. Two, it's in a center of capitalism. Three, it's perhaps the most successful club in Europe. I mean, Real Madrid, Bayern Munich. That's it. I don't think there's any rival. And it's virtually completely people owned. The notion that the only way s- the energies of the market commerce can be unleashed is with this capitalist, I don't know, ball
I
and
don't know.
chain.
I don't know, Leighton. We probably need a whole other discussion on this because these, to me, these football games and even competitive football and these things, basketball, these are all arms of capitalism to me. Omar, you wanted to chime in on this section?
Why? At this moment, I just know that Pan Africanism is as relevant today as it was 100 years ago. And
Hold on just a second. There's some static. Go
yes,
ahead, Omar.
yeah, man. Yeah, man. I just want to reiterate my position that Pan Africanism is relevant today as it was 100 years ago. Because, as I would have mentioned earlier, I still find that African people, whether we are in the diaspora or we're on the continent or we're in the Caribbean, um, still find that we're still trying to find our way economically. And I think at the end of the day, we need to focus on economics. Whichever way we are going to define it. Um, I'm disagreeing with Leighton strongly as well that we cannot define capitalism. Each generation of people can define things for themselves. Like nobody can tell me say Haile Selassie a God. Me rate Haile Selassie, but me no believe in a God totally, and me can't say Haile Selassie as God. And nobody can tell me he's not Rastafari, because me a Rasta. You know? Yeah, I thought, I mean, I believe in a God total. Nobody can tell me say no particular person is God or no, not at all. I must all the way a God then, you know? So I say this to say that we can define things for ourselves. Tafara made a comment that I like conscious capitalism, in which we're going this thing. I know that we're not going there to exploit and oppress the people, but we're going in this thing to build companies, build brands, and make money to take care of our community. Because without us applying certain principles before capitalism, that our own people would have been involved in West Africa and other places that they were trading. The richest black man in the world now, Alika Dangote out of Nigeria, his great grandfather in the 18th century built an empire in Ghana, where we had pyramids of kola nuts. And when I speak about economics, that's what I'm talking about. Us organizing our resources. Whatever we have, land, you know, we have people going to the best universities now. So it's not like one time when we were kept out of learning from the institutions. So we can organize ourselves. But I think some of us too caught up in the spirituality thing sometime, the party thing, and Rastafari, which was the conscious drivers for certain philosophies and ideas, have brought the gun junk, you know, and so forth. So it's about being conscious, totally conscious along the way, you know. And when we get serious as a people about our collective responsibility, because I think part of the problem is that we have getting too parochial in our view as well. As long as some of us are all right in our homes, we think it's all right. You know, we don't really care about what's happening. But for us and those who really care, your local job or one local thing not get us out of the problem we're in. And whenever we are economically strong, that is when our legislation and everything will follow. And everybody out there who's telling Africans what to do, they must bring in LGBT, they must this, they must that before them can get money, before them can get aid. You know, when we organize ourselves around our resources, own it, control it at every level, at the raw material, primary level, at the secondary level, we start processing at every level. When we start owning that, whichever way we want to define it, that is when we will see a rise in the living standards, the consciousness, and the confidence of African people to naturally express themselves, or we ought to be expressing ourselves without thinking that we need to think like or be like some European who originally got their idea about living from our ancestors.
Conscious capitalism sound like an oxymoron to me. But I don't know. Sister Clarion, welcome to the stage. Thanks for joining. What do you have for us this evening?
Greetings, family. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, man, loud and clear.
All right, good. All right. Capitalism is something that we've accepted, and many of us believe it works one way. It doesn't work that way. A lot of what you call it now? I was at Liberty Hall yesterday. They're talking about welfare and people being beggy, but a lot of rich people welfare takes place in capitalism. When, for example, the banks went down here in Jamaica in '96, we saw Island Victoria Bank disappear, Workers Bank, Central National, Paul Chen Young and Company, Mutual Security Bank. When all these banks disappeared, some banks were chosen to stay alive. Those important choices um, are not based on capitalism, you know. Sometimes it's based on who knows who and who is related to who. And so capitalism is always based on some kind of welfare. When you see the police going downtown Kingston or anywhere in Jamaica and destroying or seizing the goods of Black people selling on the streets of Jamaica, that's not based on capitalism. That's based on a principle that certain people must control downtown Kingston and make money from downtown Kingston. I used to leave Jessie Paul Primary School and sit on the road with my mother selling on the street, downtown Kingston. Michael Manley said that Black people should have bought up those stores. Um, the reason you go downtown and see Chinese people owning most of those places is not based on capitalism. It's not based on this idea that we all love to think is actually what is reality, that the person who does business the best survives. It can be the group of people who are willing to burn down some other people place that survive. It can be the group of people that willing to pay off a government, or you know there are things that happen on the
But
ground
isn't
and
that,
behind.
aren't all of those things part and parcel of capitalism? Capitalism don't come without violence.
Well,
Capitalism and
well,
slavery. Eric
right,
Williams
right,
told us.
right. That's okay. Well, I don't know what definition of capitalism you're working with, but for the masses, Leighton probably needs to mute. For the masses, they think capitalism is a beautiful idea where the person with the capital and who does business best and offers the best product wins at the end of the day. And so I'm saying no, a lot of welfareism, but they're not going to call it socialism when they give a tax write-off to the Chinese man. They don't call it socialism and welfare, but if they go down to the inner city and help poor people, they call that welfare, and they say poor people must be begging, and them for go look at work. But nobody ever says the Chinaman must pay his tax. You
I see
understand?
what you're
So,
saying, Sister Clarion. I see what you're saying. I want to pivot though, back to some issues surrounding Garvey specifically. One of the criticisms Garvey received was what they described as, his detractors described as, his obsession with this pomp and grandeur, the suits, calling himself the president of Africa. Many people don't know that, but Garvey was the first person to actually call himself Honorable Marcus Garvey. That's not something others gave to him. He gave himself that title. And some people even go as far as to say, in trying to instill pride in African people, he did this by way of mimicking Europeans. So it was not necessary that it was intrinsically an African statesmanship. It was more like, oh, you have the white star line, so I should have the black star line. Oh, well, you wear suits and button up stuff, button up jacket. So why shouldn't I, as a black man, do it too? And in that sense, many people criticize Pan Africanism as a reactionary movement, not a revolutionary one. Leighton, you want to jump in on that?
Yes, those critics uh, might also be persons who talk about the splendor and grandeur of previous African empires. Do they know what pomp and ceremony attended those African empires? Like, is the problem with pomp and ceremony, or that his pomp and ceremony look too European? And
I
since
think it's a
Europe,
bit of both. I mean, he did. I don't think we can get away from that. he certainly fashioned a lot of his uh, ceremonial activities around European tradition.
I see. Well, you know, the Greeks um said that they took everything from Ethiopia. Pythagoras studied in Ethiopia like 15 years. So that's all I have to say about that. Like, to be honest, Keisha, I can't even begin to to address people who bother with things like those. Like, it gives people pride. That's what they have a problem with. Do they have the women's auxiliary, the uniforms, the marches, the insignias, the orders, the suits, the hats? I mean, like, people were proud, people were
Well,
dignified.
I mean,
People,
let's be fair to the critics. If we host a Pan African meeting now and the speaker shows up in a three-piece suit as opposed to a dashiki, modern day Pan Africanists will frown upon that. So, in the same way,
I
we
want to comment on
expect
that.
people who say Africa for Africans to dress as such, the same way Garvey's detractors, and I'm playing devil's advocate now, the same way Garvey's detractors may have a point when they say, why, if Garvey was so proud of being an African, why was he always in European suits? Omar, you took off your mic. You wanted to answer that one?
Yeah, really. All right. I think sometimes we tend to want to major in the minor them instead of look at the big picture them. However, Africans, in my view, and some can argue the Orientals as well, are the most fashionable places on earth. You know, the most high quality fashion coming out of Africa. Um, Marcus Garvey copying the three-piece suit. It's not Marcus. It's not him alone. You know, if we are gonna be truthful to ourselves. Haile Selassie um wore a lot of suits. A lot of the African leaders, with the exception of I would say probably Kwame Nkrumah, wore a lot of European influenced suits. For one, I don't know if it's a issue of confidence because nowadays you see indigenous people wearing their indigenous garb in various houses of power or halls of power in the world. Um, but I think it's really a minor issue because long before Garvey and others, African people in Egypt and other places had pump, you know, probably it different kind of fashion. But I think it's really a minor issue. And Garvey was what I would say now. You can't do things small still. People not gonna rate you. You have to do things big. And Garvey as a fire sign and Leo understood that you have to go big and broad and it have to look appealing because people at the heart, regardless of them race and who them be, people are attracted to things that look successful. People that are successful. That's the reason why everybody want to leave Jamaica and go America. Not everybody, but some people. That's the reason because of what they show them on TV. America is successful. It's a place where you can come on this. People are attracted to success. So Garvey knew as a person who studied human beings that he had to show people success. He had to show them organization. He had to show them that, we can do this. Because what they knew were Europeans doing their stuff. So when Garvey showed them, juxtapose that now with Africans in the West, organizing themselves, owning bakeries, owning ships, dressing up in suits, calling ourselves honorable. I remember them call, why them call black people back in them time? Nigger, nigger, all kind of something. So Garvey changed the script. That's what he did. And I have no issue with Garvey doing it the way he did, because we cannot judge 1920s and the 1915, 16, 17, all those times with our 21st century lens. Yeah, I think sometimes we should be fair to people and the context in which they were,
We have to judge
the
a man
context in
based
which
on
they existed.
the time. We have to judge a man based
Yes.
on the time he lived in. I want to read a comment in the chat from Linus. Even with his three-piece suits, he did more to advance the African race and identity than any other. So what is the real issue? I mean, I totally agree, but I think it's something that we need to raise, especially in light of modern day Pan-Africanists who some would call them kings with no kingdoms because there's a lot of talk, there's a lot of dashikis, there's a lot of change in your names. The young people call them hoteps. There's a lot of wearing of African costume. It's like an African costume party. But when it comes
True.
to the actual work,
True.
they haven't done anything, even remotely close to what Garvey did in his so-called white man suit. So going back to the topic, is Pan-Africanism today a matter of suits and symbols and changing names? And we are afraid of or reluctant to do the actual real work that Garvey did, put his life on the line, go to prison. And not just Marcus, but even his wives. You know, is that part of the problem? That as what we want now is Pan-Africanism in imagery. Garvey didn't change his name not once, but he was more of an African leader than Kunte Baga Kunte or whatever they want to call themselves these days. Sister Clarion, you want to respond?
Yes, one of the things that is clear about Garvey and his success is that Garvey probably belonged to a lodge and would have had certain knowledge that a lot of these brothers and sisters who just went and read two books and decided, okay, I should wear, cloth that is really being manufactured by Europeans, but it has African um, symbolism and that kind of thing on it. Garvey could buy three ships and he could put on what small-minded black people look on and say is just for show because he was actually that successful, right? I was um, a student of Queen Mother Mariam Samad, who was born. Her mother gave birth at a Garvey meeting, for example, and her parents had stock in the company and that kind of thing. He was actually that successful. That's why he could ride in a Rolls Royce. Now, he would have known that the suit and clothing and high civilization and high culture was really the creation of the black man. So he would not have felt uncomfortable putting on a suit because if you went up into Europe and you found people crawling around on all fours and then you had to clean them up and teach them how to cook and bathe themselves every day and put on clothes, if you knew those things, then nobody can tell you, oh, don't put on a suit because it's the white man invention. It's not the white man's invention. A lot of what we think is white people's invention um, was set up by black people in Europe. but because white people are the faces of it, right? But behind the scenes, even though there's a black guy who's running the creative side of one of those big European houses, fashion houses that Kanye West wanted to beat, and they showed it that this black guy is the one who, you understand, was behind it. A lot of what goes on in the European world, and we believe is Europeans doing it, really rely on the creativity of black people. Pretty much how you see music, for example, is the creativity of black people that put out the music, but the European man might control the distribution of it and that kind of thing. So anything that has to do with culture and civilization and creativity and genius, you're always finding our people at it, you know? So they don't have that kind of knowledge that Garvey had. That is why they're not able to effect the changes on the ground. We are seeing the relevance of Garvey's message 100 years later. We see that that's what the Chinese people use. Everywhere you go, you see a little China. It's based on those ideas that Garvey put forward 100 years ago, and they are very successful. When I was growing up, I was watching TV and looking at Chinese people growing rice, and that's my idea of what a Chinese man is. And now he owns supermarkets and malls, and he has a lot of power on the government right here in Jamaica. But our own people, for whatever reason, when I was, for example, serving as the lady president of the UNIA in 96 and 7, and when the man from Popeye said black people should be glad for slavery because that's how we are able to read and write, and we decided that Popeyes would not remain operating in Jamaica, and we were successful at it. A lot of our people did not understand the importance of economics and working together and saying, listen, we should have our own supermarkets and wholesales. And now you're seeing, the Chinese just all over the place because people could not understand that concept from the 90s. They called us racist. They say, you guys are racist. I would say, but this is what the Chinese is practicing and doing. They're practicing race first and people first. And and our people were just not educated enough to understand that concept. And now, they're being overrun. Chinese now want more than a supermarket and a wholesale in Jamaica. They want land. And
And
pretty
they
soon,
and not only do they want it, they will get it. Brother Omar, you wanted to respond to this particular point. Please go ahead.
Yes. You raised an important issue um earlier, and it's the does it Pan Africanism now comes down to optics. If you can wear a dashiki suit, or if you have locks, if you can have the anchor or certain thing I wear on you. And I think for a lot of people, that's for them that is what it comes down to, how them can wear and if them can eat ital food like Rasta, or if them can read the philosophy of opinion of Marcus Garvey and involve in local conversations. But to me, that is so peripheral to what true Pan-Africanism is. And a part of it is that we have gotten classes. A lot of us have adopted the classist, elitist attitudes of the colonial people, especially some of these people who go to universities, like some people who go to UA and other places abroad. Them feel like them better than them brother and sister downtown now, or in a St. Thomas, or some other place. I Tupac Shakur is one of my favorite Americans. I remember some woke African people invited him to a conference to come and talk, and him saying nothing using the expletives. And knowing Tupac, the first thing him do up on stage and say, boy, start expletive and say, boy, we call ourselves kings and at the same time we kids them a starve and women them a get raped and certain kind of things still happen. We call ourselves king, we call ourselves this, that, all kind of name what people call themselves. At the same time, we are not representing these names in practice. That's why I mean, this thing, nobody call me king and them something there, because apart from Haile Selassie, most kings of me know appear conquer people, place and kill people and rape people and have all hate concubine and disrespect them wife and then something there, something. I mean, to depend them something there. Me depend the real works of what Pan-Africanism should be about, our collective responsibility to our community and our community and our commitment to self-empowerment so that we can be of use to the community. That to me is Pan-Africanism. It's not we wearing dashiki or if we are gonna wear some Louis Vuitton or whatever it is. To me, that is outside the issue. African people have always been a fashionable people from creation. We are the most creative, most fashionable, whatever. That's the reason why even when a man poor or whatever, what them kind of love wear gold chain because and them kind of thing because we like to look good. We like to smell good. When European people, the sister touched on it a while ago, a beard 2 times a year. African people go them place and show them say you have a beard and clean up all these things. You know, so we've always been a royal people. But classism, elitism, and some kind of behavior that is not compatible with Pan-Africanism. Because to me, regardless of how educated you are or whatever, you should be able to level with your brother and sister them. And stop behave like we're better. We are not better than we are. There's a principle I'm called I am because we are. And that is always my principle. And that's what Pan-Africanism should come back to. I am because we are. It's not no clothes, not a car or that kind of thing. The education you have, whether you live up at Red Hills or you live up at Jacksonville or you live at St. Thomas in the bush.
Thanks, Melanin. Leighton, I want to talk about this issue of Pan Africanism being a reaction to white supremacy and not necessarily inherent to who we are. Africans traditionally don't necessarily refer to themselves by way of the continent. They say they're a Igbo, they say they're a Fulani. It's because of the state of our captivity why we even have to come up with Pan Africanism. So, in that sense, a lot of people going back to the original conversation about native and the idea of unity, how we bridge that gap between our individual identity and this concept of we are globally the same when we're so different. I mean, even in the chat, I have to laugh because some Rasta say them born God, some Rasta say a Jesus Christ them thing there. Some Rasta say them born Gavi. We're going to unite with all these differences.
As I said earlier, white people believe a whole heap of different things, and they are at odds over a whole heap of different things. The one thing that unite them is that
Yes, Leighton.
all.
Sorry to cut you. But the one thing that unites them is the one thing that disunites us. Their perception of themselves or their perception of us is the same. Black people, we don't all see European as the same. So for me, I don't see anything African in a three-piece suit. And my brother Omar and others might say, well, everything come from Africa. I would disagree. I would want to get as far away from European traditions or habits as possible. So it's still fundamentally different because they unite where it's important. No doubt they have differences, but they unite where it's important. For us, we have no unity where it is important. The only thing we unite on is that we love to dance and wear gold. What else do we unite on?
Um, we don't unite, and I think the reason that we don't is because of our indoctrination as much as anything else. But And okay, let me go back to the garbage dress for a minute. Um, People change, people evolve, and what is of importance to people, perhaps more than likely, it was necessary for Garvey to dress like a wealthy European to attract black people to his movement. In the course of his movement, he was able um, to affect people's thinking and consciousness to a degree that now, if you see someone dressed in African garb in the West, the first thing you say is, "Are you a Garveyite?" So the people who criticize him for his dress then are looking at it through, historically, fractured lens. And also, their problem, if you really, really dig down to the root of it, is that he was creating, although based on a European imprint, he was creating a black order, which they didn't want because they were assimilationists. They wanted to be close to white. So anything that they could do to discredit that black order, they did. And the way to discredit it is to say, hey, it's not even African, it's European based. It gave people pride because it was theirs. It gave people pride because it was theirs. And as I said, it spawned thinking of it spawned a thinking and a consciousness that led people into, unfortunately, this kind of costumery that you so rightly talk about. But as far as why we are not doing anything but wearing costumes, it's because we know that the cost of that is imprisonment and death. Persecution, imprisonment, and death. And we also know that the majority of people will vilify us as they did Garvey, and that we will die broke and alone and crumpled as he did. And that's the reason that I'm just gonna be perfectly, perfectly frank. That's the reason that we limit ourselves to costumery and fist waving and petition writing and all the other bullshit.
That's a very important point, Leighton, and we have to highlight that the consequences of being a real revolutionary movement is worse than death. Most revolutionaries can hope for death, but that's not what you will get. It's far worse than that because the system is determined to keep us oppressed. But there's something I want to raise. I'm so sorry to be going on much longer than normal, but this is such an important topic. The concept of the Back to Africa movement that is associated with Garveyism and Pan Africanism, not just back to Africa mentally, but also physically. Modern day pro black people, let's use that term since Pan Africanist might be controversial. So, yes, use the term pro black. Modern day pro black people who have the means to return to Africa are not going to Africa. Let us look at the subgroup, let us say reggae artists who travel to Africa all the time. But for some reason, Africa is not desirable enough for them to live there. Doesn't that in itself hurt the movement? Because if Everybody, all white people, everybody, Chinese and everybody is moving to Africa, investing in Africa. But the pro black people are not. What does it say about our movement?
It just said that there are frauds. And let me just say this, is a quiche. There is a difference between what we know in our heads and what we know in our hearts. What we know in our heads are that Europeans are fascinated with Africa, they are deeply invested in Africa, Asians as well, Russians as well. Everyone wants to go to this very, very poor continent, this benighted continent, this cursed continent. Why are they going there? And the same black people, like their intellect tells them that these people that are going to Africa, these Europeans, because we love to ape everything that Europeans do. The only thing that we don't want to ape Europeans to do is to go to Africa. And so, and it's because deep down we've been indoctrinated into the belief that Africa is pagan, Africa is backward, Africa is full of thief and scammer and all kind of terrible practices and voodoo and whatever. Um, this is what we are indoctrinated into, and every time you see beautiful pictures of modern buildings in Africa, we're like, wow, Africa really developed, you know. But nobody's really check. Ask anybody their bucket list. Um, you know, they don't even want to see the pyramids in Egypt. They don't even want to see the pyramids in Egypt. They want to see the Eiffel Tower. They want to see all of the wonders that slave labor, African enslaved labor built. But they don't want to see even the wonders of the world that reside on the continent.
Umar Johnson says he's the prince of Pan Africanism. Why isn't his school in Africa? Anyone on the panel wants to respond. Melanin, please.
Money.
I know you have to leave soon, and we are in fact wrapping up soon. So if you could respond to that question as well as to leave us with one of your beautiful gems before you go.
Uh, Keisha and everybody else, I think, comes down to money. It really comes down to money. As I said, people like the shiny things, you know? People like that, and African people cannot escape it, you know? So I think our celebrities who have, and a lot of them, especially Jamaican Rastafari people in reggae music, have been some of the biggest proponents of going back to Africa and all of that. A few of them may travel over the years, but there's nobody that have really relocated, so to speak, to give anybody else the confidence to go there. However, there have been some people, not a lot of big names, but a lot of African Americans, people from Jamaica as well, have moved to Africa. So, so it happened. But the proponents, the people who you probably expect, you know. But I just want to say that Keisha, and you probably know because you know a lot of artists by this. I don't expect nothing great from a lot of these celebrities, including a lot of our artists, because a lot of them, they're just doing it for the money. And sometimes I wonder where the message comes from, if it's from the same person when I meet some of them and see how them build. You know, so I really think that the message that some of them comes from is from the ancestors. But them themselves are different people from the message, you know? So sometimes we have to just separate the messenger from the message. All right. I have to go. So I'm gonna leave you with this thing. To me, this is a Pan-African poem. It's called "It Is Time." Kind of lengthy, about 3 to 4 minutes, but I think the message is very relevant to our discussion. It is time, dear Black people. I am Melanin, also known as Omar Ryan, and this is my message to you. It is time. It is time. It is more than time that we all recognize that we are more than just Black people. Wherever we are, whomever you think you are, we are collectively a part of the African people. A people with a long, vibrant, colorful history of black, purple black, blue black, red black, brown black, black people doing things, great things. Yes, kinky hair, thick lips, round hips, undiluted black people. We always have had our cultures, our own goddesses and gods. Not just dance and song, but philosophy, science, literature, and mathematics. Many inspiring innovators. And you know what, African people? We can create a future greater than our past, but we must know that it is time. Wake up time, action time, my time and your time to be strong in our minds. Use our hunger to do something great for our kind. Tear down colonial symbols and signs. We have faced all the hard times, broken homes, myriads of gun crimes, living desperately below the poverty line, broken promises, lost dreams, dead hopes, blind faiths, and unkind grace. It is like we are seeing with blinded eyes. So, my people, it is more than time. Way past prime time, not the daily news, sports, and entertainment reviews, enlightenment time. From all the distractions that have us bemused, it is time that we recognize that these neo imperialist, ultra capitalist societies run by neo colonial governments do not represent us. Their systems were not made for us. These politicians do not represent us. They do not take care of us. These shenanigans only play some of us and get elected to be elevated to the rich and famous. Then they are out on the next bus because guess what? Them already get for them bus. These courts do not give justice to us, ordering us with oppressive colonial legislation saved in clause through constitutions. Food companies do not really feed us. Their foods do not nourish us. They are slowly poisoning us, giving us obesity, diabetes, cancers, sugars, and illnesses not even known by them. Then they send us to their hospitals where they always have a potion to recommend for us. From their pharmacies that are always ready to take our dollar bills, like these banks banking in our backs and governments exploiting us with tax. We've got all the smartphones and gadgets telling time, but it's like we now watch that. That most of these media houses do not give information to empower us. Their mission is to control the things we think about, displaying merchants produced in front of our prefrontal cortex while our sons and daughters are being taken from us. Some trained as police officers to disrespect, brutalize, and demoralize us. It's past realization time. Some of us have been living in the past time and need to get with the now time. That we must stop the senseless killing and maiming of each other. We must grow from the blaming of each other. What do we gain from the praying of each other like sharks hunting dogs, filling up marks, drunk from rum spilling jars? We need to raise the bar. It is time. It is time. Wake up, realization, action time, enlightenment, wise time. African people, let's get with the time before we are out of time.
Give thanks, Melanin. Thank you for joining. Thank you for sharing that piece with us.
Yeah, man. Respect and manners, always ready to share and be a part of these movements because this is what my life is about, Pan Africanism and advancing the cause for Not just myself, but my people, you know.
Thank you. And we're definitely gonna have to do a part two to this session because so many additional and tangential topics are being raised in the chat. We could go on and on and on, but I'm mindful of the time. So I'm going to invite everyone now to give their final thoughts. Final for now. Sister Clarion, are you still with us? What you think we should take away from this topic, and whether or not Pan Africanism is still relevant in 2024?
Yes, definitely. I believe it's relevant. It will be our saving grace. The idea of, um, he was saying that everybody, he said the European is fascinated with Africa, but it's not really a fascination, it's a need. And if you're dealing with reality of being on the ground and getting food together and getting resources together that you need, you have to deal with Africa and the resources present in Africa that they don't have in Europe. And it just makes sense for us as a people, where Gabi said whenever he traveled, he saw us at the bottom wherever he went. The only place he didn't go was Africa. And that reality is true today. And it's because we have either not produced leaders, or the leaders we've produced were removed, the way Michael Manley was removed. And so the realities of our life, the talking just does not put bread and butter on our table at the end of the day, because other people go out and they put systems in place. And when we do, and when we try, like Gavi did, um, we are attacked. We don't have any group that goes out and attack the Chinese for setting up their businesses here in Jamaica. We don't have any groups that go out, and if Europeans having a meeting, we want to know what Europeans are discussing. But if Black leaders in the Caribbean said, hey, we're going to have a meeting and talk about how to make sure more Black people own business downtown Kingston, the white man wants to know what took place in that meeting, and the China man wants to know. We don't have that on our agenda. We don't try to spy on anybody and find out anything about what other people are doing, you know. So there's a reason for that, being the original people on the land and the people from which, through which a lot of things in the reality manifests itself. We will always be first, and we'll always be the parents and carry a level of responsibility. So, yeah, man, Pan Africanism is important.
Thank you, Sister Clarion. Brother Leighton.
Uh, I obviously it's more important now than it was even then, and it seems further away now than it was then because of the level of indoctrination and assimilation that has gone on. The best that we can hope for is that uh, late stage capitalism will fall. And it contains, in my opinion or belief, the seeds of its own destruction. And when that time comes, if we have not organized ourselves along a different model, an alternative model that centers our Africanness, African communalism, and our African traditions. And I don't mean the traditions that bring us into conflict, but the things that make us essentially African. Um, I un, until there is an impetus to do that, and I don't know. I mean, it sounds pessimistic. I don't know where that impetus will come from. And at the root of it, we have to be willing to bottom line. And if there is that, not that, if if that impetus, that willingness is not there, bottom line, then we'll be at the bottom of everywhere.
I was reading a section of Garvey's biography, and there was a point in which he mentioned the pale, removing the pale faces from Africa. And of course, we know people like Khalid Muhammad and others who spoke in a similar way when it came to how people of the Caucasian variety are to be dealt with. And for me, if I could select one major barrier to Pan Africanism today, is the fact that Black people do not want to separate from white people. We want to marry them, we want to integrate with them. And when I say Black people, I'm speaking also those persons who identify themselves as Pan Africanists. And certainly that is in direct contradiction to Garveyism. So I agree with you, Leighton. It's a major hurdle to get over. Kush, I'm not sure if you are able to hear us, but if you'd like to give your contribution on the topic.
Greetings, greetings. Yeah, I've been here to hear the last part and the last half of the conversation. Um, Very interesting. But yeah, I do agree that uh, add to the notion. I think Daniel was saying there seems to be also a new Pan Africanism, um, which is not necessarily new. Is almost like if I go back to Garvey and what was going on at that time, there was a part of the Pan African movement that was that wanted to be more connected with Europeans or the European nations. So when Garvey was pushing for a back to Africa movement or a closer economic tie with Africa and African nations, the Pan African movement or the Pan African persons at that time was pushing for a domination of where black people were. So a domination of America. If black people can dominate America or be on par with the white man or other ethnic groups in America. And I think that's going on now. So Jamaica, you have a Jamaicanist instead of an African Jamaican. We have Trinidadians. The idea of being a Pan African means that you can be a proud African Jamaican and not concerned with African issues, um, not working. So if we have to wear suit, the idea of wearing a suit is to work for Africa. It's not that anymore. It's the fact that an African can look bossy in suit. Um, if we have to utilize European invention, is not to work towards the growth of African Africans. It's to showcase that we can afford or we can get these things, you know. So the idea of Pan Africanism is not about Africa anymore necessarily. As I said, a new Pan Africanist, and Garvey was a black nationalist, not only a Pan Africanist. He was a nationalist. So everything that we do is to build a nation. You know, right now I don't think we're not even sure what kind of nation we're building, because a nation need a base. So I like the conversation. I think we need more of this conversation to know what the work is and what the message is, so we can either start it back, continue it, or you know do some new tactics. But first, I think we need to know what the message is and what the work is, and this is why these conversations are very important.
Thank you, Kush, and thanks to everyone who joined. Thanks to all who participated in the chat. Thanks to those who joined to listen. I appreciate your presence this evening. Of course, we can never do fully justice to this topic in just one conversation. We will have to have a follow up or perhaps many follow up conversations to really get into the meat of the matter when it comes to Garvey, Pan Africanism, and the way forward today. But thank you nonetheless. I look forward to having you on the next Truth Gangsters, same time, same place next week. Have a good evening, everyone.